Okay, so the topic here today is how to do a sponsored series, how and why to do a sponsored series. In other words, how to get more referrals from referral partners. And we're going to give you some concrete examples to explain what we're talking about here. So, Jeremy, give us an overview of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, people ask us all the time, John, is how do I get more great guests for my podcast? When we're talking about referrals, we're talking about people recommending and referring more great guests for the podcast. So that's what it's about, because you want to form these amazing relationships by having them on your podcast, and forming, getting your message and your company in front of them. So the first thing you're going to do when you want to do a sponsored series, and basically what that means is you're going to partner with a company so that they can recommend you more great guests. So you want to first formulate a list of who you want to collaborate with on the sponsored series. Okay. The companies you want to collaborate with on a sponsored series are good referral partners for you. Maybe you know them and they've already referred you people, or maybe you just have a hunch that they have a lot of clients and customers that are, basically great clients and customers for you. So brainstorm who is a good referral partner for you, whether you know them or you don't know them. Okay.
And let's use a specific example here to kind of make this more concrete. So let's say that you are an agency that focuses on helping e-commerce companies. So you work with e-commerce companies. That's your end client, is the e-commerce type of company that's selling products online through a website. So a possible e-commerce community for you could be like a mastermind community. It could be a software that serves other e-commerce companies. It could be a conference that every year gathers 1,000 or 10,000 e-commerce companies together in one city under one roof. Those are good potential referral partners. And those are the companies that you want to approach and you want to work with to do the sponsored series. And we should also say it's a bit of a misnomer, because we say sponsored series, you're not collecting any dollars from them. You are positioning it as it's a sponsorship, but the currency that's changing hands is not money in the traditional sense, but rather you're giving time, energy, money. It's costing you money to produce this thing. But rather than charging them something, you're gifting it to them, to this community.
That's a great point, because I don't charge for sponsorship, but I give away sponsorship all day long, because you want to give away sponsorship to your best partners and referral sources.
Yeah. And one other objection I want to address, because sometimes people think like, oh, but why would I do this in partnership with a conference? The conferences are not my clients. And the way I view it is, sometimes you have to take multiple steps to this approach. And so you give up 45 minutes to do an interview with the conference, or to do an interview with a software company, or to do an interview with a mastermind community owner of a mastermind community. Even if that is not your end client or customer, that 45 minutes could be the best 45 minutes you've ever spent, even if they never become a client or customer, because you've made a connection, you've built a relationship. And then to take it further, you can use this sponsored series approach that we're talking about to deliver even more value to that individual, that organization, that community, by featuring them. Yeah. So Jeremy, you mentioned.
And one more point is, when we went through the Dream 100 process with a company, we have brainstormed these referral partners under conferences, software companies that, and also masterminds and communities. In this situation, we're going to use the example of e-commerce.
Right. Now, so another objection I do want to say is, why would someone do this with you? Or maybe they're thinking like, what's the catch to you? To that, I would respond, look, we're just looking for great content that I want to share on my podcast. Some of the best introductions, some of the best interviews I've had have come from direct introductions. Or you can turn around and say, I'm doing this because we love what you do and we want to support what you do.
Yeah. So the first thing to do is, like we said, formulate a list of who you want to collaborate with. Okay. In the example of if you were an agency that serves e-commerce brands, This could be a mastermind community that has a lot of e-commerce brands. It could be like an e-commerce fuel, when there's lots of different groups that serve e-commerce brands. It could be a software that serves e-commerce brands. Let's say it's a Shopify app that a lot of e-commerce brand owners are using for their website. Okay. That would be a software. And conferences. There's tons of e-commerce conferences. There's Shop Talk, right? There's Prosper Show. So you can actually approach a conference organizer owner as well. So the first thing is you generate that list. Okay. The first thing is, after you generate that list, is you ask them to be on your podcast. You want to give to them. You want to form a relationship with them. So ask them to be on your podcast. It could be the person who owns the mastermind community, someone who founded the e-commerce software, or who started the e-commerce conference.
And it only makes sense, by the way, to have them as a guest on your podcast, because that's one, it's going to be far more effective to ask them after the interview is over, after you've delivered value to them, to make introductions after you've interviewed them. And secondly, if you didn't interview them, there could be resentment, possibly. Like, why would they want to open up their network and Rolodex and introduce you to all the people? Not always, but a lot of times. Why would they want to open up their Rolodex and introduce you to those people if you haven't asked them also to be on? Like, it might be a silent, unsaid thing, but they might be like, well, I'd like to be a guest, Yeah. I think we under realize how that can be a powerful force.
Now, if you've been doing the podcast like us for a while, you may have already had that, referral partner on your podcast. Okay. So we'll just continue the example where, let's say you haven't had them on yet. You ask them to come on. So you can see we have in the Rise 25 University a direct message that we send that has all the elements in it. So you could check that out. So once you have them on, after the interview's over, how do you take that relationship further? How do you keep giving to them? So after the interview, you could say, listen, this was amazing. I would love to give you a sponsorship to 3 episodes of my podcast. Okay. At no cost. All right. All I ask is I'd love to brainstorm with you on what would be the best guest for those episodes that I allow you to sponsor. And then you just schedule another call. It's a 30-minute call. And we'll get into that on what you talk about on that call. But on that call, you brainstorm who would be the best people to feature for that sponsored series where you're giving them the sponsorship to those episodes. Now, I say a limited number, 3 or 4, because it has inherent value. You don't want to just say as many as possible. Now, you could end up doing more, but you don't want to just overcommit to it as well. And also, you want to position it too as being choosy, which you are, because let's say you brainstorm 10 names, you don't want to be obligated to have all 10 of those people on. You want to be like all 10. I have a certain criteria that I'm looking for on my show. So you may say 3, but you go, listen, these 5 are really good. I'll give you 5 sponsorship to my podcast, right? Yeah. But we'll get into that in a second. When you have them on your podcast, when the podcast is over, that's when you want to, tell them, listen, this was great. I'd love to give you 3 sponsorships. I'm not going to charge you anything. All I ask is we brainstorm and talk about who would be best to get your brand, your company in front of. Right.
And before we get into that, but who would be ideal for them, because there's different categories of the types of people. Let's go back to the specific example again. Mm-hmm. So if you are an e-commerce agency serving e-commerce clients, and you're approaching a mastermind community, when you approach them, you lead with sincerity. Okay. So you can say something like, look, you know what? It's hard today to be a successful e-commerce company. I love what you're doing with building this community. You've put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. You've created this community that's helping these companies to navigate these bloody waters today. And I just think it's wonderful that you've done that. And I love the community. I love e-commerce companies. That's what we feature on our show. And so I would love to be able to give back to you for everything that you've contributed to the community. Yeah. So leading with sincerity is a great way to pitch this to that community that you are pitching to do the sponsored series for.
And in reality, it is a company that you believe in, that you like, because you wouldn't want to give them a sponsorship message if you did. And one line to add into that is, I want to get your company, your community in front of more e-commerce sellers, right? Or fill in the blank for whatever you serve. But that's basically what you're trying to do. You're trying to help them get in front of more people.
Yeah. And by the way, if psychologically you're thinking, well, wait a second, I just started my show, or I don't have a big audience, or I don't have a ton of downloads or something like this, remember, first of all, you got to believe it. And secondly, it's going to be up on the interwebs forever. Years from now, people are going to be discovering this. So there's interviews I've done years ago, and I get emails years later, people saying like, oh, I saw this interview you did, which doesn't have a date on it. So they're like, this interview you did, and it's like something I did 8 years ago, but you're going to be giving these people exposure for years to come. So you can be confident in the fact that you are helping to give people exposure, even if in your head you're thinking, well, I just started, or I just am getting started right now.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And you'll see when we get into the details of the brainstorming with that company, why it doesn't matter how many downloads you have at all, and how it's going to benefit that company. So the example is, you have them come on your podcast. If you haven't, once you have them on, then you can say you want to schedule this separate conversation to give them sponsorship, and you use the language we just discussed. Now, the next thing is to brainstorm with them on a call. You get on the call and you can brainstorm potential guests that you're going to give them sponsorship to. Okay. I don't know if you want to go into, that's the scenario where you just had them on the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. The other quick scenario is, if you've already had them on the podcast before, the referral partner, and you're just like, oh, what can I do to build more, relationships and get more guests of someone I've had on. Then if you've already had them on, you can send them an email with the exact same thing that we just talked about that you would say over the phone, which is, I really I love what you're doing for the e-commerce community. I want to share with more people to get your community in front of more people. I would love to give you a sponsorship to 3 episodes of my podcast. And then you mentioned what John said about, what's the catch? Well, it's because our best episodes come from referrals for people like you. So I'd love to hop on a brainstorming session to talk about who we should have on for those episodes that I would be giving you a sponsorship message for, or a sponsorship for. Okay.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the brainstorming and who are the ideal types of potential members of this community, this e-commerce fueled type of community. And you can pitch it to them like this. It could be existing members of your community, or it could be existing clients, where it turns into kind of like a mini testimonial, because when you interview them, you could ask them about, so tell us about your experience with being part of this community. And of course, it's going to be someone who's, a fan of being part of the community. So they're going to say nice things and it becomes a testimonial. It could be an ideal client who's not a client yet, or an ideal member who's not a member yet. So someone who they want to have as a member. And it could also be a referral partner of some sort as well. Yeah. We've also done this where we're approaching like a conference organizer, and we say, big fan of your conference, love coming every year. Or it could be one you don't go to, by the way, but love what you do for the community. And, want to help get the word out about it. And a great one is their sponsors for that conference, because those sponsors would be appreciative for getting that additional exposure that they don't get anything really out of their sponsorship until they actually get to the conference itself.
Yeah. So just to reiterate the steps, you've made a list of the people, you've had them on the podcast. Now we're on the brainstorming call with them. And so when you're brainstorming with them, like John mentioned, you want to brainstorm, okay, e-commerce fuel or Prosper Show. Who are some of your clients, customers that we should have on? And I'm going to turn it into a mini testimonial so that you can use it in your marketing. It's going to be, we're going to include some questions so they say good things about you, of course. The second category is an ideal client. They may be like, you know what, John, we have this brand we've always wanted in our community. Well, then great. I'll reach out and I'll try and get these people on the podcast, right? And then the third one is if they have referral partners. So let's say there's software companies that are always recommended in e-commerce field and go, these software partner e-commerce companies are always referring us great people. Why don't we feature them in this sponsored series? Okay. So you make a list with, when you're on the line with them and go, okay, here's some clients that would be good fits. Here's some potential clients that would be good fits. And here's some referral partners that would be good fits. And now it's choosing a couple. Now, if they're going to be introducing you to their clients, then you want to send them an email that they can just copy and paste and send to those clients. So you can see that email in the section with the direct email response of something they can just copy and paste and send to those people. If it's an ideal client for them, they may not know it, but you can reach out in LinkedIn or to that person's website and say, hey, I was chatting with e-commerce fuel and they are mentioning how impressive you are as a brand. We'd love to feature you. So you can reach out to that person or company, or it could be referral partners as well. So the easiest one is oftentimes just the clients or customers of that company. And that way you can say, listen, I'm going to turn this into, it's going to be an interview, but we're going to actually ask some questions of why they love your community or your conference or your software. And it could be something they use in their marketing efforts.
And this is truly amazing because 100% of businesses feel like they should be gathering more testimonials from their client base and they're not, right? So like, if you're like, I'm just going to reach out, interview them for the podcast, and I'm going to ask them about how they like being part of the community, they're going to make introductions like that. Like, you make introductions really fast. Another thing I want to point out, Jeremy pointed out the exclusivity of just having it be 3, maybe 5 episodes so that you can be exclusive. You don't have to interview all 10 if they recommend 10. And it's not like an unlimited amount. But you also want to position this as something exclusive. So we're big fans of phrasing it in a way that makes it feel like something that people want to be a part of. And so, for example, Jeremy's done on his podcast the Top Agency Leader Series for agency owners. And who doesn't want to be considered a top agency leader? Or he's done the Top Venture Capitalist Series. Who doesn't want to be considered part of the top VC series? And especially once you get a couple of names included in there, they start to see other names there, then their competitive juices flow. They're like, I want to be part of that. Or you could do it with your alma mater, Top University of Wisconsin Alumni Series, where you go out and like, oh, I want to be considered a Top University Alumni Series with, oh, you're including that person and that person. I'd love to be included in that. So you want to position it as something that's very exclusive.
Yeah. In this situation, it could be the Top E-commerce Series. It could be even more niche. Sometimes I've even named it the name of the company in the series. So if it's, let's say it's e-commerce fuel, like you're talking about, this is the Top E-commerce fuel series. I mean, you could literally name it the name of that company in the title. They're getting more SEO juice and they're getting even more notoriety than just their name being read in the beginning.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Let's talk about conducting the actual interview, Jeremy.
Okay, cool. So the next step, you form the list, you have them on the podcast, you brainstorm the list, you invited the people on. Now you're on the actual interview with that, in this situation, top e-commerce brand. Okay. There's a couple things to think about. One, some people mistakenly think since you're giving this company a sponsorship that you don't read your own sponsorship. Okay. You want to make sure that you read your sponsorship like we teach on this episode. You're adding their sponsorship message in. So you're still gonna read your sponsorship message for your company, but then you would say, hey, before I introduce today's guest, I just want to let you know about e-commerce fuel. If you're an e-commerce brand, you must join this amazing community of top sellers that are blah, 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 blah. So you're giving them a separate plug in addition to yours. Okay. And the other thing you want to do, you want to make sure that you can work this. You want to make sure you have some questions about that company when you're inside the actual interview itself. Okay. So if you are going listen, I know, John, you've actually been a member of e-commerce fuel. What are some of the things that you love about it? What are some of the things that you like? What attracted you to that community? And you start talking about that community. So it could be right then and there after the sponsorship message, you go into a few questions about what they like. And so a few good testimonial-like questions are, what made you start working with that company? What made you join the community? What do you like most about the community? What have you gotten most out of that community? Or company. So there's 3 questions that you could use. And the rest is, again, just whatever your interview style is and content style is, but you can add one of those or all of those 3 questions in to get a mini testimonial for your sponsor.
I think we've just about covered it all here, Jeremy. Do you want to kind of recap from the top?
Yeah, and I think the last piece is always follow up with a thank you email. After that interview is done, immediately email the person that you had on, email the community or software just saying, thank you. It was amazing. I really appreciate it. You're going to love it. And it gets the dialogue going between the person that you had on and the person that introduced that person. So highly recommend just following up with a thank you. There should be, and the companies we work with, we will send a follow-up email. So making sure that both parties know about it and are able to promote it, which would leads to more great guests.
Yeah. And if you have just interviewed someone who is a potential member of their community and they haven't connected, so the company or the individual, the e-commerce fuel that you're doing the sponsored series for has not connected with that brand that you've just featured, it's even more important to make that introduction for them.
Good point. Because in that case, it would be they're a client or customer of that company. If they're not, but they're a potential, then you add them on and say, hey, we talked about you, and you're almost like giving a mini email introduction.
All right. So wrapping it up. Thanks, everyone. Hope that was helpful, and we will talk again soon.